It was almost midnight when the millionaire collapsed in front of his screens and whispered, "I lost everything." The cleaner left her cart, stared at the screen for 3 seconds, and uttered a single phrase in a low voice. Her destiny changed there. The city lights reflected against the windows of the 32nd floor of the Liberty Tower, as if the night itself wished to witness what was about to unfold. It was nearly midnight, and the capital's financial heart was already asleep. But up there, on the top executive floor, 2 lives that had never truly crossed were about to collide, in the only way that changes destiny. In silence, without witnesses, and with the quiet force of things unplanned, Eleanor Vance pushed her service cart down the carpeted executive hallway with the short, precise steps she had learned over the years. A middle-aged woman, with discreet gestures and an intelligent gaze, an employee on the night shift for citywide cleaning solutions. She carried a small backpack over her shoulder where she kept a thermos of coffee, an apple, and a thick, dark blue book. A book no other member of the cleaning team ever carried. A book that, if any executive on the floor had seen it, would have made them catch their breath for an instant. But none of them had ever looked at her long enough to notice the book. That was, in fact, the first rule of the 32nd floor. The woman with the cart was invisible. Eleanor, the low voice of Brenda Jenkins, the night supervisor for the cleaning company, an older woman with a dry tone, brushed her ear as she passed. "Remember the office at the end. The CEO is still in there. Almost half an hour ago, he asked me internally not to let anyone in until further notice. When he leaves, you go in, do what's necessary, and leave. No greetings, no questions." "Yes, Miss Brenda. And one more thing." The supervisor held her elbow for a moment. "I don't dislike you, Eleanor. You joined my team a while ago, and I still don't understand what someone with your demeanor is doing on this shift. But you do your job well, and here, that's worth more than any diploma." Eleanor barely nodded, offering no reply. She had learned long ago that unspoken words weigh less on the soul than words one forces oneself to say when nothing needs to be said. Brenda walked away towards the service elevator. Eleanor was left alone with her cart in the hallway. She moved slowly. She started with the conference rooms at the end of the hall. She cleaned empty glass tables, forgotten glasses, crumpled papers that no executive had bothered to shred before tossing them into the wastebasket. Papers Eleanor never read, though her eyes, without her asking, had learned to recognize in a fraction of a second whether what lay before them was a quarterly balance sheet, an internal memo, or a portfolio exposure report. Because Eleanor Vance had years ago been another woman, a woman who had studied risk modeling and anomaly detection in algorithmic systems at a top European university. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A woman who had worked on a quantitative trading desk for an internationally recognized financial institution when she was still young, and the world seemed an open map. A woman whose father, Dr. Albert Vance, a university professor of applied mathematics, had placed her first scientific calculator in her hands before her first doll, telling her with the solemnity of men who love what they teach, "Daughter, numbers are a language. Learn to listen to it. People lie. Numbers never do." But that woman no longer existed on the surface. She had been carefully packed away long ago within Eleanor's heart, along with the worn photograph of Daniel Vance, the husband who died in an accident when their daughter, Lucy, was still a toddler, and along with the eternal years when that sick daughter had demanded every minute, every dollar, every abandoned plan from her mother. Eleanor had sold everything she owned. She had left her career, disappeared from the professional world. She had saved Lucy. Today, Lucy was studying medicine, shining as a young promise, and had no idea of the exact magnitude of what her mother had silently put on the table so that she could rise. And Eleanor, now in her middle age, without a recent resume, without a network, without time to build from scratch, had accepted the job at the Liberty Tower because it was the job available and because the night shift allowed her to read at dawn. That was her story, a story no one on that floor knew, until tonight. Eleanor rounded the corner of the corridor and stopped. The door to the main office of Everest Capital Group at the end was ajar. The light inside was strange, not the usual white light of the ceiling panels, but the shifting, almost violent glow of several screens flickering simultaneously. And amidst that irregular glow, she heard a sound that chilled her to the core, a sob, not loud, not shrill, but the contained, slow, almost ashamed sob of an adult man who had been holding it in for a long time and was finally allowing himself to release it when he thought no one was listening. Eleanor stood very still, looked at the cart, looked at the door, remembered Brenda's instruction, do what's necessary, and leave. The right thing to do at that moment was to retreat, skip that office, clean it the next morning. No one would know. But then, from inside the office, a broken male voice, almost a whisper, said aloud a phrase Eleanor heard with the clarity of a blow. "I lost everything. I lost everything. How is it possible? How is it possible?" Eleanor swallowed, placed both hands on the edge of her cart, and at that instant, the woman who had spent years hiding the other woman within herself, the analyst who had learned to read numbers when she was still a child, heard something that surprised her even more than the sob. She heard, coming from inside the office, the unmistakable sound of a repetitive, audible alert. This alert had a very specific pattern, 3 short tones, a pause, 3 short tones. It was a trading system alert code, and not just any alert. It was an out-of-parameter execution alert, 6, 7, the kind of warning a system only issues when it detects that its own orders are being processed by something other than its original logic, 6, 7. Something Eleanor had studied thoroughly years ago, something she had written her thesis on, something whose sonic signature was unforgettable to anyone who had worked on serious quantitative desks. Eleanor took another step towards the door. The sobbing had ceased. Inside, the man was breathing heavily. Eleanor hesitated. She was going to pass by, going to respect his private pain. But then the sound pattern of the alert changed slightly, a minimal variation, almost imperceptible to an untrained ear. And that variation told Eleanor in a fraction of a second, something that froze her in the hallway. That alert was not reacting to a real market collapse. It was reacting to an internal execution pattern. This wasn't a crisis. This, if her seasoned ear wasn't deceiving her, was ongoing manipulation. Eleanor gently knocked on the door with her knuckles. Once, slowly, almost as if apologizing. The voice from inside responded with a tired, almost defeated tone. "I told the supervisor, no one should come in." "Excuse me, sir." Eleanor's voice was firm, controlled. "I'm from housekeeping. If you prefer, I can come back later. I just wanted to let you know I'm here." There was a long silence. Then the voice from inside, almost without strength. "Come in. It doesn't matter anymore." Eleanor slowly pushed the door open, and what she saw on the other side confirmed every one of her suspicions. Marcus Thorne, founder and CEO of Everest Capital Group, a successful middle-aged man accustomed to needing no one, sat in the executive leather armchair behind the glass desk. His tie was loose, his shirt cuffs unbuttoned, and his right hand pressed against his temple. In front of him, 3 large monitors displayed descending red charts with a violence that seemed designed to destroy the will of anyone who looked at them. And on the smallest screen to the right, a message in capital letters pulsed at regular intervals. "System failure, out-of-parameter executions, intervention required." Marcus barely looked up when Eleanor entered. His eyes were red, but he didn't see her. He looked at her without truly seeing her, as one might look at a piece of furniture entering the room. "Clean quickly," he murmured, pressing his hand to his temple again. Eleanor nodded. She began to empty the wastebasket, wiped the edge of the desk. Her eyes, however, were doing something different from her hands. Her eyes, during those few seconds it took her to cross the room, scanned the 3 large monitors on the desk with the speed and precision that can only be learned from years on a trading floor. What she saw on the central screen made her stop. 3 seconds had passed, barely 3. But in those 3 seconds, Eleanor Vance saw what none of the analysts who earned fortunes on that floor had managed to see in hours of panic. She saw the pattern, she saw the signature, she saw the unmistakable imprint of something taught in risk modeling classrooms that almost no one truly learns, because it demands patience, intuition, and a mathematician father who teaches you to listen to numbers from childhood. They were ghost executions. Positions were being drained from the fund at a speed the human eye could not detect, but which a well-trained system could register as an anomaly. And the pattern of anomalies did not correspond to an external market collapse. It corresponded to an internal sequence. That shattered man was not being ruined by the market. He was being ruined by someone from within. Eleanor slowly straightened up, clutched the cloth against the side of her cart, looked at Marcus, looked at the screen, looked at Marcus again, and for the first time in years, she heard her father's voice inside her. "Doctor," Albert, telling her, "Daughter, numbers never lie, but sometimes they scream, and when they scream, you have to speak." She took a deep breath, placed a hand on the edge of the table, and said softly, almost apologizing in advance, a single phrase. "Excuse my intrusion, sir, but that screen isn't showing you a market failure. It's showing you anomalous internal executions. If you don't shut down that system in the next few minutes, you'll lose even more. And not because of the market. Marcus Thorne lifted his head and, for the first time that night, truly looked the woman with the cart in the eyes. The silence that followed Eleanor's statement was one of those silences that weigh more than any shout. Marcus Thorne stared at her without blinking, his hand still pressed against his temple, as if his brain was trying to process something that didn't fit into any of the categories he had used in his entire adult life. The woman who cleaned his office had just told him in a single sentence 2 things he hadn't been able to decipher in 4 hours of panic alongside his most expensive analysts. First, that this was not a failure. Second, that this was not the market. Marcus lowered his hand from his temple, slowly straightened in his armchair, and for the first time all evening, his voice came out steady. "What did you say?" Eleanor pressed the cloth against the edge of the cart. She felt her heart pound against her chest with a force she hadn't felt in many years. A part of her, the prudent woman, the woman who had learned to disappear for an entire decade, screamed at her to apologize, to say she had made a mistake, to return to her cart and clean the next room. But the other part of her, the old voice of her father, Albert, telling her, "Daughter, when numbers scream, you have to speak," held her gaze steady. "I told you, sir. That screen isn't showing you a system failure. It's showing you anomalous internal executions. And if you don't shut down the algorithmic engine in the next few minutes, you'll continue to lose positions even if the market closes." Marcus remained silent. His eyes, red just a moment ago, were now fully awake, as if someone had thrown a bucket of cold water over his head. How? How do you know what I'm looking at?" Eleanor hesitated, but there was no turning back. That threshold had been crossed the second she decided to speak, and something within her that had been dormant for years began to awaken like a docile but firm beast. "Sir, look at the right-hand column on the central screen, the column where the latest executions per millisecond are listed. Do you see it? I see it. Notice the interval between each operation. Normal ones have natural variation. Yours, in the last few minutes, have a regularity that is neither human nor market-driven. Every certain number of legitimate operations, an operation appears that doesn't fit the logic of the previous ones. It's a pattern. And patterns, sir, don't generate themselves. Someone programs them." Marcus turned his chair towards the central screen, leaned forward, and for the first time all night, looked at the data as he should have looked at it from the beginning, not with the panic of someone who thinks they are losing, but with the cold eye of someone who is starting to suspect they are being robbed. 20 seconds passed. 30. Eleanor didn't move. When Marcus turned back to her, his face had changed. It was no longer the face of the broken man from minutes ago. It was the face of a hunter who had just caught the scent of his prey. "You're right, ma'am. You're right. Every 43 operations, there's one that doesn't respond to the main algorithm. Exactly every 43. My system doesn't program that way. My system doesn't think that way. This isn't my system." Eleanor nodded. "Shut down the engine, sir, before we talk further. Shut it down. Every minute that code keeps running is your money going somewhere you didn't intend." Marcus hesitated for a moment, then he reached for the keyboard. His fingers flew across the keys with the precision of a man who knew every shortcut of that software by heart. 3 commands, a password, a confirmation. The central screen flickered twice, and then, with a soft sound, almost a sigh, the algorithmic engine of Everest Capital Group stopped. The silence in the office became absolute. Marcus leaned back in his armchair, closed his eyes. For an instant, Eleanor thought the man would collapse again, but when he opened them, his expression was new. It was the expression of someone who understood in a fraction of a second that he had been about to lose much more than he already thought he had lost. "Ma'am," he said, with the slow voice of men afraid of making a mistake with the next word. "Tell me your name." "Eleanor Vance, sir. And tell me, Miss Vance, how do you know what you know?" Eleanor lowered her gaze for a moment, then raised it again. She felt the years of silence rise in her throat like a river that had finally found an outlet. "Because many years ago, sir, before I started pushing this cart, I worked on a quantitative trading desk. I have a master's in risk modeling and anomaly detection from a European university. My thesis was precisely on the statistical signature of internal algorithmic manipulations in trading systems." 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Marcus Thorne was speechless. Slowly, almost unintentionally, his eyes traveled from Eleanor's face to the cleaning cart, then to the small backpack she carried on her shoulder. From there, to the barely visible outline of a thick, dark blue book peeking out from inside the backpack. "May I see that book you have there, ma'am?" Eleanor hesitated for just a second, then opened her backpack, took out the book, and placed it on the desk in front of Marcus. It was a technical book on mathematical financial modeling, advanced edition in its original language, with pencil annotations in the margins and precise underlining in each chapter. The kind of book no member of the cleaning crew in history would ever have carried in a backpack at 11 at night. The kind of book only someone who hasn't stopped belonging to the profession, even if the profession has left her out, reads after many years away from the field. Marcus ran his fingertips over the cover. Then he looked at Eleanor with a mixture of disbelief and respect that she hadn't received in a long time. "Miss Vance, you shouldn't be cleaning this floor. You should be sitting upstairs in a senior position, earning what the analysts who couldn't see in 4 hours what you saw in 3 seconds earn. Life has its reasons, sir." Marcus stood up, walked to the window, and gazed at the city at night for a long time. When he turned back to her, there was a new determination in his eyes. "Miss Vance, what you just did probably saved an enormous portion of my fund, but what's coming now is worse, much worse. Because if what you say is true, someone within my own company, someone with access to the algorithmic engine, is manipulating the system. And if they're manipulating it tonight, it's because someone planned this night. It's because someone knew I would be alone in the office. It's because someone wanted the fund to wake up tomorrow in such a dire situation that there would be no turning back." Eleanor listened to every word with the same respectful silence with which her father, Albert, had taught her to listen to her professors when she was a child. "Sir, who in your company has access to the algorithmic engine?" Marcus thought for a second. The answer came quickly, almost automatically, but tinged with a shadow she recognized immediately. The shadow of a man who has just understood, too late, a truth that had been before his eyes for a long time. "Only 2 people in the world, ma'am. Myself and my co-founder, Victor Sterling." The name hung in the office like a sentence. Eleanor didn't respond. She didn't need to. Marcus Thorne's face said everything she needed to hear. The man brought a hand to his forehead, leaned against the glass desk, and for an instant, he was again the collapsed man of half an hour ago. But this time, the difference was enormous. This time, he was no longer collapsed by a loss he didn't understand. He was collapsed by a betrayal he was just beginning to understand. "Victor," he murmured. "Victor, with me since day one. Victor, who was at my father's funeral. Victor, who signed the fund's first incorporation agreement with me when we were just 2 young men with nothing. Victor." Eleanor remained silent. Marcus lifted his face. His eyes, now completely dry, held the cold firmness of a man who was beginning to calculate consequences in real time. "Miss Vance, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly, because what you decide in the next few minutes will change many lives, including mine. And if you accept, yours too. I'm listening, sir. I need you to stay here tonight with me. I need you to help me document the pattern you detected. Every operation, every millisecond, every trace. I need to build, before dawn, technical evidence, solid enough so that tomorrow I can confront Victor with proof, not just suspicions. And I need to do it with someone who understands what they're looking at. And in this building tonight, the only person who understands what they're looking at is you." Eleanor felt the blood rush to her cheeks, not from pride, but from fear, from the sudden awareness that this threshold, once crossed, had no turning back. If she said yes, her quiet life of night shifts and morning reading would end that very night. If she said no, it would also end, but with the eternal guilt of having seen what she saw and done nothing. She thought of Lucy, her daughter studying medicine, of everything she had sacrificed so that her daughter could get to where she was. And for the first time in many years, Eleanor understood that the sacrifice she had made wasn't to hide forever. It was to wait for the exact moment when life would ask her again to be the woman she had once been. That moment was tonight. "I accept, sir." Marcus bowed his head with a respect he hadn't shown almost anyone in many years. "One condition from my side, ma'am. Tell me, if tonight we manage to build the evidence, and tomorrow I can confront Victor with proof, you will never again push a cart in this building. Not because pushing carts is insignificant, but because pushing carts is not what you were meant to do. What you are meant to do is what you did 4 minutes ago." Eleanor didn't respond. She only nodded slightly, her eyes shining. Marcus walked to his desk, picked up the internal phone, dialed 3 digits. He waited. "Mr. Henderson, this is Marcus Thorne. I need a favor. The cleaning service lady on my floor tonight, Eleanor Vance, will be staying with me in the office until dawn, working on an operational emergency. Please inform Brenda Jenkins that I personally assume any administrative consequences of this decision, and I request absolute discretion. No one should know that this woman was on this floor tonight. Can I count on you?" On the other end of the line, the old, firm voice of Mr. George Henderson, the elderly doorman who had known Eleanor since the first day she crossed the lobby, responded with a single word. "Count on it." Marcus hung up. He turned to Eleanor with a small, almost childlike smile, the first real smile she had seen from him that evening. "Mr. Henderson likes you, ma'am." I heard it in his voice. "How many years have you been crossing that lobby?" "Many years now, sir." "Well, then I'll confess something to you. Mr. Henderson told me a long time ago that there was a cleaning service woman in my building who always carried a book." I laughed. I told him he was making up stories. "I beg life's forgiveness tonight, ma'am. Mr. Henderson saw something I didn't. And starting tomorrow, I assure you, I will learn to see what he sees." Eleanor smiled for the first time in many nights. A small, tired, beautiful smile. "Let's begin, Octavio." And together, the collapsed millionaire and the invisible cleaner sat in front of the screens of Everest Capital Group to reconstruct, millisecond by millisecond, the signature of a man who believed himself untouchable. The 32nd floor office took on a different light after that decision. Marcus Thorne turned off the ceiling panels, leaving only the desk lamp on. The screens, with the algorithmic engine now stopped, no longer flickered with the aggressive red of the previous failure. They displayed static lines frozen in time, waiting for two people to read them patiently. Eleanor Vance sat in front of the central monitor, placing her hands on the desk. For a second, before starting, she let her fingers feel the cold glass. It had been so many years since her hands had touched a desk like this. So many years since her eyes had looked at a screen with the responsibility of deciphering something that weighed millions. Marcus pulled up another chair, sat next to her, handed her a new notebook and a pen. "Miss Vance, I will operate the system. You tell me what to look for and where to look. We'll note every anomaly, every trace, every millisecond. We need to build, before dawn, a sequence so clear that any independent expert who looks at it tomorrow will not have a single margin for doubt." "All right, sir. And please," Marcus lowered his voice, "stop calling me sir. Tonight, in this office, we are two people doing the same job. Call me Marcus." Eleanor hesitated for an instant. Then she nodded slightly. "Marcus." They started with the most recent period, the last few hours of operations. Eleanor asked him to extract the execution log per millisecond and cross-reference it with the main algorithm's log. Marcus typed commands with the speed of a man who had known that system for years. Thousands of lines of code appeared in a side window. Eleanor scanned the first few with her gaze, then leaned forward. "Here, look at this block. Execution 43 is marked as automatic internal, but the source hash doesn't correspond to your algorithm's hash. It's an identifier that seems legitimate, but it's not. It's disguised." "Disguised?" Eleanor explained. "Whoever programmed this, Marcus, didn't want to hide the operation. That would have triggered alerts. They wanted it to look like a legitimate operation of your system, but with a different technical signature that would leave an exit door to another location. The code's aesthetics are yours. The internal syntax is by another hand." Marcus stared at the screen for a long time. Then he slowly shook his head. "Victor knows how to write code like that. Victor was a programmer before he was a partner. Victor knows my algorithm line by line because we built it together. I'm sorry, Marcus." The millionaire took a deep breath. He didn't speak for an entire minute. When he finally did, his voice was calm, almost professional. He had silently decided to leave the pain for later. That morning, there was only room for precision. "Let's continue. I need to see how far back this goes." Eleanor asked him to go back in blocks. They looked for the same pattern in the previous day's operations. They found it in the previous weeks. They found it in the previous months too. Every 43 legitimate operations, a ghost operation, draining a small portion of the profit to a masked destination. A portion so small in each individual operation that no superficial analysis would have detected it, but accumulated over months, it was a fortune. Marcus brought a hand to his face when Eleanor showed him the estimated sum by extrapolation. "We've been bleeding for months. I didn't realize it. No one would realize it at first glance, Marcus. It's designed not to be seen. Tonight was a peak. Something accelerated the frequency today. If it hadn't been tonight, in a few days the bleeding would have been visible even to a rough analysis, and that would have triggered all alarms. Why did it accelerate today?" Eleanor thought for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice had the cold firmness of a trading desk analyst. "Because someone wanted the fund to wake up tomorrow in such a serious situation, that the board would be forced to make emergency decisions, probably to sell positions at fire sale prices, probably to offer stakes to an external buyer who was already waiting. Marcus nodded slowly. Victor has had meetings for months with a group of Asian investors who have been pressing to enter my fund. I always said no, that's the answer. Then Marcus fell silent. Then he picked up the internal phone. He dialed a direct number. Catherine, this is Marcus Thorne. Apologies for the hour, but I need you to come to the building now. Yes, this very morning. No, it's not about an invoice. It's something serious. Criminal. I'll explain when you get here. Bring your laptop and a recorder. Yes, thank you. He hung up. He looked at Eleanor. Catherine, Kate Riley, my criminal defense attorney, young, brilliant, specializing in financial crimes. If I'm going to confront Victor tomorrow, I won't do it alone, and I won't do it without legally prepared documents. All right. While they waited for Kate, Marcus stood up, walked to the panoramic window, and gazed at the city at night for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Not the voice of the fund director, but the voice of the man behind that position. Eleanor, can I ask you something personal? Ask away. Why did you leave your career? Eleanor set the notebook on the desk. She leaned back slightly in her chair, looked at the lamp's reflection on the glass desktop, and for the first time in many, many years, she told another human being what she almost never told. She told him about the accident that took Daniel when Lucy was still a tiny child who had barely begun to speak. She told him about the medical diagnosis that came a few months later and changed everything. She told him about the years when life was reduced to a hospital, a pharmacy, a waiting room. She told him how she had sold the apartment, the car, the books, the watches, everything but the technical books, because those were the only thing her father had left her, and because something inside her knew she would need them again someday. She told him about the year Lucy finally got out of bed and went back to school, and the year Lucy entered college to study medicine, and how, when Eleanor tried to return to the professional market, she discovered that the world had moved on without her, that her resume was from another decade, that the doors were closed, and that the only job she found was the night shift at Citywide Cleaning Solutions. And here I am, Marcus, pushing a cart in your building. Marcus turned from the window. His eyes were shining. Eleanor, Lucy doesn't know anything about what you did, does she? She knows enough. She knows I worked in finance before. She knows I left my career to take care of her. She doesn't know the magnitude, and I never want her to know. Daughters shouldn't have to bear the burden of their mother's sacrifices, Marcus. I learned that when I lost my own father. Marcus lowered his head. I didn't understand my father in time. When he passed away, I was too busy building this fund. I didn't go to the hospital those last few days. Victor did. Victor was there when I wasn't. And my father, before he died, made me promise to take care of Victor. He told me that young man was loyal, that he treated him like another son. He paused. Tonight, Eleanor, besides discovering that my partner stole from me, I discovered that my father was wrong in judging a man, and that hurts me more than the loss of money. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was soft. Marcus, your father wasn't wrong in judging Victor. He judged him by the young man he was then. People change, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. Your father loved him for what he saw. Don't blame him for what he couldn't foresee. Marcus brought a hand to his eyes. He nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else for a while. Catherine Kate Riley arrived at the office almost an hour later. A young woman with a firm stride, a sober suit, and a professional backpack slung over her shoulder. Marcus made the introductions. Kate shook Eleanor's hand with a respect that wasn't mere courtesy, but immediate technical recognition. Marcus had explained on the phone who the woman sitting beside him was. Miss Vance, it's a pleasure. Marcus told me a bit about your background. We're going to work together this morning. I need you to explain to me, in legally usable terms, exactly what you discovered and how you'll prove it. Whatever you need, counselor. The three worked tirelessly for the next few hours. Eleanor explained the technical pattern. Kate translated it into legal language. Marcus signed every document that was prepared, authorizing Kate to act as the fund's legal representative in what was to come. Before dawn, they had a solid technical legal dossier, a notarized affidavit, prepared to be signed by a notary, a friend of Kate's, who would arrive first thing in the morning, and a plan of action for the following day. Marcus, listen carefully. Kate had sat on the edge of the desk. Tomorrow, when Victor arrives, you don't confront him alone. I'll be with you. Miss Vance will stay outside the office in an adjacent room with all the material visible. If Victor tries to deny anything, we'll call Miss Vance and ask her to explain the pattern in front of him. If Victor tries to personally attack her by questioning her credibility, we'll show him her academic resume, which we've already started to document tonight. Victor will not leave this office tomorrow, the same man he entered. Marcus nodded. And one more thing, Kate, when this is over, I want Miss Vance to have a position in my fund. The position she deserves, not one that fits into an existing organizational chart, a new one. Custom-made. Kate smiled. We'll discuss that tomorrow, Marcus. The first rays of dawn began to color the sky behind the panoramic window. Eleanor stood up, stretched her arms. It had been so many years since she had felt the fatigue of an intense night of intellectual work. It was a different kind of tiredness from pushing a cart for 8 hours. It was a tiredness she had forgotten existed and that, for the first time in a long time, tasted good. Kate gathered her laptop. She was folding the last papers when footsteps were heard from the outside corridor, firm, familiar steps of expensive shoes on the carpet. Marcus froze, looked at Kate, looked at Eleanor, and said in a low voice, "It's him. He arrived early." The office door burst open. In the doorway, impeccably dressed in a suit and holding a steaming paper coffee cup, appeared Victor Sterling. He smiled when he saw Marcus sitting in the armchair. A wide, easy, complicit smile, the smile of a lifelong brother. But the smile froze on his face when he registered the two women in the office. A lawyer he knew well, and a cleaning service woman he had never looked at closely in years. "Marcus, what is this?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He slowly rose from the armchair, adjusted his jacket, and held the gaze of the man who had been at his father's funeral, the man who had signed the fund's first contract with him, the man who had been draining what they had both built for months. "This, Victor, is what you didn't expect to happen tonight." The silence that followed Marcus's words was one of those silences that split life in two. Victor Sterling stood in the doorway, the steaming paper coffee cup still in his hand. His eyes, skilled at reading markets, but trained for years not to read the person in front of him, did the one thing they shouldn't have done at that moment. They swept across the office, saw the screens with static lines, saw the open notebook on the desk with technical annotations he recognized instantly. They saw Catherine Riley zipping up her laptop. They saw the cleaning cart woman standing by the central monitor, without a work uniform in her hands, without a cloth, without a broom, just standing, arms crossed over her chest, looking at him as no service staff member in history had ever looked at him. Victor smiled again, but this time the smile was twisted. "Marcus, what's going on here? What's a cleaning employee doing in a meeting with your lawyer at 6 inches the morning?" Marcus walked slowly to the desk. He placed his hands on the glass. He looked at his partner for a long time before speaking. When he finally did, his voice was controlled, almost serene. But inside, Eleanor felt that each word cut through the millionaire like a slow knife. "Victor, sit down, please." "Marcus, tell me what's going on. Sit down." Victor hesitated for an instant. Then he placed his coffee cup on the side table near the entrance, adjusted his jacket, walked to the chair in front of the desk, and sat down. But his body language had changed completely. His legs were tensely crossed, his hands pressed against his thighs, his eyes darting from Marcus to Kate, to Eleanor, and back to Marcus. Kate opened her laptop. Marcus picked up the notebook. Eleanor remained standing by the central monitor in silence. "Victor." Marcus's voice was soft, almost paternal, like someone speaking to a son who is about to receive a truth that no one can soften anymore. "Last night, when you left the office at 7:30, telling me you had a family dinner, I stayed here late. You know how I am. When something doesn't feel right, I stay until I understand. And last night, there was something that didn't feel right. It hadn't felt right for weeks." "Marcus, let me finish. Last night, the system showed me an alert that I didn't understand. I called Ethan. He didn't answer. I called the technical support team. They didn't either. I was left alone in front of the screens, watching the fund bleed out without understanding why. And at some point, I broke down. Victor, I cried in front of the screen like I hadn't cried since my father's funeral. I thought I had lost everything." Victor opened his mouth to speak. Marcus raised a hand. And then Miss Eleanor Vance entered the office. She's from the building's night cleaning service. And she told me in a single sentence that what I was seeing on the screen wasn't a market failure. It was internal manipulation. Victor slowly turned his head towards Eleanor. He looked at her with an expression that was no longer of a surprised partner. It was the look of a man who understood, in a fraction of a second, that the piece he had discarded as irrelevant was the one that was going to cost him the entire game. "Marcus, this is absurd. A cleaning woman cannot know Victor." Marcus's voice dropped a tone. Miss Vance has a master's in risk modeling and anomaly detection from a European university. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Her thesis was precisely on the statistical signature of internal algorithmic manipulations. She worked for years on a prestigious international quantitative desk before retiring for personal reasons. In 3 seconds, she saw on my screen what none of our analysts had seen in 4 hours, and we spent all night, she, I, and Kate, reconstructing the pattern's signature. Victor swallowed. And the pattern's signature, Victor, bears your hand. Every additional line of code was written by someone who knows my main algorithm by heart. Every ghost operation exits through a masked route that only 2 people in the world know, you and I. And it wasn't me. Marcus, listen to me. We've been bleeding for months. Victor, every 43 legitimate operations, a ghost operation draining a fraction to a parallel structure. A fraction so small that no surface auditor would detect it but accumulated a fortune. Last night, you accelerated the frequency. Why? Because you wanted the fund to wake up today in such a deep crisis that the board would be forced to accept the offer from the Asian group you've been meeting with for months. The offer I rejected 3 times, the one you kept negotiating behind my back. Victor brought a hand to his neck, loosened his tie. His face, white moments ago, began to sweat. This is ridiculous. Kate turned her laptop screen towards him. On the screen, a chain of emails extracted from the fund's server that very morning with Marcus's corporate credentials clearly showed the correspondence between Victor and a representative of the Asian fund. Dates, figures, draft agreements with clauses that would only activate if Everest Capital Group became technically insolvent before the end of the month. Victor closed his eyes. Kate then spoke with the professional calm that only highly experienced criminal defense attorneys possess. Mr. Sterling, I have here a preliminary notarized affidavit, signed this very morning by a notary who will arrive in a few minutes to formalize it. I have the technical dossier built by Miss Vance. I have the emails I just showed you, and I have Mr. Thorne's express authorization to initiate criminal proceedings for fraud, illegal association, and manipulation of computer systems the moment he indicates. Before he indicates, however, I will allow you to say something, just one thing, and I suggest it be true, because any lie you say now will be added to the file. The office fell silent. Victor took a deep breath. For an instant, Eleanor thought he would deny everything, invent a justification, play the role of an innocent partner surprised by a conspiracy. But Victor Sterling was not a stupid man. He had built an entire career on knowing when a position was already lost, and when continuing to hold, it was a greater cost than closing it. He lowered his head. When he spoke again, his voice was broken. Marcus, I didn't want things to go this far. Victor began. It started a couple of years ago. Small things. I had made a bad personal investment outside the fund. I needed to cover a hole. I thought I would be able to replenish it in a few months. But the hole grew, and then the Asians came. They offered me a way out, a big way out. If I facilitated their control of the fund, they offered me a percentage that covered everything and left me out of the system. I said yes, I'm sorry. I swear I'm sorry. Are you sorry now, Victor? Or are you sorry because we caught you? Victor didn't respond. Marcus stared at him for a long time. Then, with a gentleness that surprised even himself, he said, My father loved you, Victor. My father treated you like another son. Before he died, he made me promise to take care of you. And you, Victor, for months, while you had breakfast with me, while you asked about my health, while you came to my house for Sunday lunch, you were draining what my father helped me start. Victor began to cry silently, head bowed, hands covering his face. Eleanor looked away. She didn't want to see. That man had committed an enormous betrayal, yes, but watching a human being break down in front of her, even a human being who deserved it, wasn't something she needed to engrave in her memory. Kate let a full minute of silence pass. Then she spoke again. Mr. Sterling, you have 2 options. The first, you leave the office right now, call your lawyer, and fight everything through a long, contentious legal battle. The second, you sign a statement of facts today, assisted by your lawyer. You voluntarily return what is documented as irregularly appropriated and cooperate with the case to identify the third parties involved, especially the Asian group and the external programmer who wrote the additional code. The second option does not exempt you from criminal liability, but it saves you many years of a process you will lose anyway, and it allows Mr. Thorne to recover the fund without publicly destroying the reputation you both built over 2 decades. Victor remained silent for a long time. When he finally lifted his head, His eyes were red, and his expression defeated. "I'll cooperate." "Good." Kate pulled a pre-printed sheet from her briefcase. She handed it to him. "Call your lawyer. I'll give him half an hour to get to the building. Meanwhile, you'll stay in this adjacent room, without system access, without a phone." Victor nodded in silence. He stood up, walked to the door. Before leaving, he stopped. He turned slightly towards Marcus. He wanted to say something. It didn't come out. He just moved his lips and left. Kate followed him to settle him in the adjacent room and oversee the call. Eleanor and Marcus were left alone in the office. Marcus sank into his armchair, brought his hands to his face. For a long moment, he didn't move. When he finally lowered his hands, his eyes were red, but his gaze was serene. "Eleanor, thank you." "Don't thank me, Marcus. I just saved the fund. You just saved the life I thought I had lost. And you still need to pay me. I repeat, no." Eleanor smiled faintly. "What happened tonight wasn't for money. I did it because my father taught me to speak when the numbers scream. And the numbers screamed very loudly last night." Marcus stared at her. He was about to say something else, but at that instant, Eleanor's cell phone, which she had left on the desk during the night out of respect for the work, vibrated insistently. Eleanor picked it up. It was Lucy. She answered. "Honey? Mom, where are you? I got home an hour ago, and you're not there. Your uniform isn't there either. Did something happen?" Eleanor brought her free hand to her forehead. In all the commotion of the early morning, she hadn't notified her daughter. Lucy, who was studying medicine and had the morning off, had come home expecting to find her mother sleeping after the night shift. "Honey, I'm fine. I'm still at the building. Some things happened. I'll explain when I get home." "Mom, what things? Are you okay? Were you fired?" Eleanor heard her daughter's voice and felt her eyes fill with tears she had been holding back for hours. "Lucy, I wasn't fired, honey. Something different. I'm fine. I'll be home as soon as I can. I promise I'll tell you everything later." "Mom, are you crying?" "I'm fine, honey, really." "Mom, I'm coming there. Tell me the floor." "Lucy, no, there's no need." "Mom, I'm coming there." Lucy ended the call before Eleanor could respond. Eleanor stood with the cell phone in her hand, staring at it, unsure what to do. Marcus had heard part of the conversation. He smiled at her with a tenderness she hadn't received from an adult man in a very long time. "Your daughter is coming." "Yes, good. I want to meet her. I want her to see with her own eyes what her mother just did tonight." Eleanor lowered her gaze. A tear fell onto the hand holding the cell phone. "Marcus, my daughter knows nothing of the magnitude of what I left behind when I cared for her. I never wanted her to know." "Eleanor." Marcus stood from his armchair, walked to where she was, and spoke with a gentle firmness. "Your daughter is an adult woman now, studying medicine. She has a right to know who her mother was before she was just her mother. And believe me, when an adult daughter discovers the magnitude of what her mother chose for her, what grows inside that daughter isn't guilt, it's pride, it's admiration, it's multiplied love. I know this because I understood it too late with my own father." Eleanor couldn't respond. She only nodded in silence, as tears streamed freely down her face. And from the corridor, still several floors away, but ascending in the elevator, Lucy Vance approached the 32nd floor, unaware that this morning she would meet, for the first time in her life, the complete woman her mother had silently kept hidden for so long. The elevator in the Liberty Tower ascended in silence to the 32nd floor. Inside, Lucy Vance, a young adult, a medical student, a survivor of a long childhood convalescence that now seemed to belong to another life, briefly looked at herself in the side mirror. Her hair was pulled back hastily, a backpack full of books on her shoulder, and her eyes still swollen from the few hours of sleep the night before. It had broken her heart to hear her mother's voice crack on the phone. The elevator door opened. Lucy stepped out into the carpeted executive hallway and paused for an instant. It was a floor she had never set foot on. All her life she had heard her mother talk about the building where I work, but Eleanor had never taken her there. She always said it was a boring building, with nothing interesting to see. Lucy now understood, as she walked slowly down the hall, that answer had always been a loving way of protecting her. Mr. George Henderson, the elderly doorman, had guided her from the lobby. He had looked her in the eyes when she identified herself. He had told her with the solemnity of older people who have seen too much, "Go up, young lady. Your mother is waiting for you. And allow me to tell you something. You are very fortunate. I've known your mother since the first day she crossed this lobby, and never, in all these years, have I seen a woman carry as much dignity on her shoulders as she does." Lucy had thanked him in silence. The doorman's words had resonated deeply within her. She walked down the corridor, past several closed doors, until at the end of the hall, A half-open door let out the faint light of morning, mixed with the still-lit glow of some screens. Lucy approached, cautiously peeked her head in, and saw her mother, Eleanor Vance, sitting in front of a glass desk with her back straight and her shoulders calm, speaking in a low voice with a well-dressed, middle-aged man who listened to her with an attention Lucy had never seen anyone direct towards her mother. On the desk were notebooks, neatly organized papers, a coffee cup, and a screen with lines of code that Lucy didn't understand but recognized as belonging to a very specific professional world. Her mother, at that desk, didn't seem like the woman in uniform she had seen for years. She seemed like another woman, a woman who had always been there beneath the uniform and who, that morning, he had come out to breathe. Lucy brought a hand to her mouth to stifle any sound. Eleanor heard something, looked up, and when she saw her daughter standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with tears in a fraction of a second. She rose from the chair, walked towards her, and hugged her with the strength of a woman who for years had embraced a sick child, dreaming of one day being able to embrace the woman that child would become. "Mom," Lucy whispered against Eleanor's shoulder. "What happened? Who is that man? Why do you look like this?" "Honey, a lot happened. Come, let me introduce you." Eleanor led her by the hand to the desk. Marcus Thorne stood up with a respect he hadn't shown anyone in a long time. He extended his hand to the young woman with a small but genuine smile. "Lucy, it's an honor to meet you. Your mother spoke of you this morning. The truth is, your mother, before she spoke of you, saved my company. But then, when she spoke of you, she also saved something else inside me." Lucy shook the millionaire's hand with a polite but confused gesture. "Excuse me, sir. I don't quite understand what's happening. My mum works here in housekeeping. Why is she like this?" Marcus looked at Eleanor, holding her gaze for an instant. It was a silent question. Should I tell her, or will you? Eleanor took a deep breath, took her daughter's hands in hers, and gestured for her to sit in one of the office chairs. She sat opposite Lucy. Marcus, with the delicacy of men who understand when they are superfluous, stepped back, went to the window, and left the two women to their space. "Honey, there are things in my life you never asked me about, and I never told you. Not out of deceit, but out of care. You were little when everything changed, and then, as you grew up, I didn't want you to carry burdens that weren't yours. But today, honey, today is different. Today, someone told me, you're old enough to know who your mom was before she was just your mom, and I think that person is right." Lucy remained very still, her eyes wide, unblinking. Eleanor began to tell her story. She told her about Lucy's father, Daniel Vance, a civil engineer with an easy laugh and grand projects, who had died in an accident when Lucy still couldn't speak in full sentences. She told her about Eleanor's own father, Dr. Albert Vance, a university professor of applied mathematics, who had died shortly before Daniel, leaving his daughter as his only inheritance, the rigor of knowing how to read numbers as one reads a language. She told her about the career she had built as a young woman, her studies at a European university, her master's in risk modeling, her years on a prestigious international quantitative desk. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She told her about the diagnosis that came when Lucy was still small, and how at that moment Eleanor decided, without a single second of hesitation, that her career could wait, but her daughter could not. She told her about the years in the hospital, the treatments, the sale of everything they owned, and how, when Lucy finally recovered and entered college, the professional world had not been able to reopen for Eleanor. Lucy listened to every word without interruption. Halfway through the story, the young woman's eyes began to fill. By the end, tears were streaming freely down her cheeks. When Eleanor finished, Lucy didn't speak for a long minute. Then she rose from her chair, walked to her mother, knelt in front of her on the office carpet, and hugged her knees with the strength of a small child, even though she was now an adult woman. Mom, I didn't know. I didn't know half of this. You didn't have to know it, honey. Not like that. Not when you were little. I always thought you had studied a bit and then quit for me. But not this. Not a big career. Not this." Eleanor gently stroked her head. "Honey, what you've done with your life, everything you've studied, everything you're achieving now with medicine, is worth more than any career I left behind. I don't regret it, and if I had to choose again, honey, I would choose you again, 100 times." Lucy buried her face in her mother's lap. She cried openly. Marcus, by the window, also cried silently, without moving his shoulders, without making a sound. He just let the tears fall down his face as he looked at the reflection of the city beginning to wake up below. When Lucy finally straightened up, she wiped her face with her hands, looked at Marcus, then at her mother, then at Marcus again. "Sir, excuse me, I still don't understand what you have to do with all this." Marcus approached, sat in the chair Lucy had left vacant. He spoke with a new serenity. "Lucy, last night, in this office, I broke down, believing I had lost everything I built in 20 years. Your mother came in to clean, saw the screen, and in 3 seconds, with the trained eye of the professional she is, told me that what I thought was a market failure was actually internal manipulation by someone inside my company. She was right. We spent the night reconstructing the evidence with a criminal defense attorney. This morning, I confronted the partner who betrayed me. He confessed everything. If your mother hadn't entered this office last night, I would have woken up today bankrupt. But also, and this is more important, Lucy, I would have woken up without understanding that money isn't the only thing you lose when you don't pay attention. Your mother returned the fund to me last night, but she also returned my clarity of mind and something else inside me that I had lost without realizing it." Lucy looked at her mother with a mixture of pride, astonishment, and devotion that no mother's eyes in the world ever tire of receiving. "Mom, you did that? I did what my father taught me to do, honey. Speak when the numbers scream." Lucy chuckled through her tears. "Grandpa always used to say that, didn't he? Grandpa always used to say that." At that moment, Catherine Riley entered the office. She carried the agreement folder under her arm and a professional expression that softened upon seeing the family scene. She greeted Lucy with a respectful nod. She gave Eleanor a brief smile and approached Marcus to inform him that Victor's lawyer had arrived at the building and that the formal procedures could begin in the adjacent room. Marcus nodded, stood up, but before leaving the office, he turned to Eleanor and Lucy. "Eleanor, Kate and I have to deal with Victor for the next few hours. I ask a favor of you. Use this time to take your daughter for breakfast. Downstairs in the building lobby, there's a coffee shop. Ask Mr. Henderson to tell the barista it's on the house. Take all the time you need, and when you're ready, ask the doorman to send you up again. We need to talk about your future, ma'am, your real future, not the one life had left available to you, the one you truly deserve." Eleanor couldn't respond. She only nodded, her eyes full of tears. Lucy took her mother's hand, squeezing it. The two women left the office together. As they crossed the corridor towards the elevator, Lucy rested her head against her mother's shoulder for a few seconds, in a small gesture that said everything. In the lobby coffee shop, seated at a small table by the window, mother and daughter ordered 2 lattes and 2 croissants. Mr. Henderson, true to Marcus's request, had given the instruction to the cashier even before they arrived. Eleanor tried to pay. The young man behind the counter smiled and told her it was Mr. Thorne's treat. Eleanor and Lucy remained silent for a long while. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 women who had spent a lifetime caring for each other and who, finally that morning, could breathe at the same time. "Mom, tell me, honey, are you happy?" Eleanor thought for an instant. Then she took her daughter's hand across the table. "Honey, I was happy many times. When I married your dad, when you were born, when your dad put you in my arms and I saw his face, when you recovered from your illness, when you entered college, when you told me you were going to be a doctor, I was happy many times, and happy like today. Honey, I haven't been in a very long time. Something happened last night that I can't quite explain in words, but something that had been dormant inside me for years, honey. It reawakened tonight." Lucy squeezed her mother's hand tightly. "Mom, promise me one thing, anything you want. Promise me you'll never hide again." Eleanor couldn't respond. She only nodded as tears fell onto the table. Meanwhile, several floors above, in the room adjacent to the office, Victor Sterling signed the first page of the cooperation document, assisted by his lawyer. Kate oversaw each signature. Marcus observed in silence, but this time Marcus wasn't thinking about Victor. He was thinking about a woman who had entered his office last night with a cleaning cart and who had given him back, without asking for anything in return, not only his company but the necessary humility to be a dignified man again. And he was also thinking that he had a position to create that very morning, a position that would bear the name of the woman who deserved it, a position that, if all went well, would ensure that Eleanor Vance would never again push a cart in any building in the world. But first, there was a call he had to make, a call to an old acquaintance in the financial world, a young and serious journalist specializing in markets, who would know how to treat the story with the respect it deserved. Liam Carter. Marcus took his cell phone from his pocket and began to dial. The midday sun fell on the Liberty Tower with a clean light that had nothing to do with the bluish-gray light of the night before. In the lobby coffee shop, Eleanor Vance and Lucy were finishing their second latte when Eleanor's cell phone vibrated on the table. It was a message from Marcus Thorne. "Eleanor, when you're ready, come up to the office. Everything is under control with Victor. The lawyer is handling the next steps. I want you to meet someone, and I want to talk to you about the position I mentioned this morning. Lucy, if you'd like to accompany your mother, you're welcome too." Eleanor showed the message to Lucy. The young woman smiled. "Mom, I'm coming with you. I wouldn't miss this for anything." They paid for what the young man at the counter refused to charge. Marcus had given clear orders regarding this. They headed to the elevator. Mr. George Henderson, from the lobby desk, greeted them with an almost solemn nod. As Eleanor passed him, he murmured something in a low voice that only she heard. "Ma'am, this morning when your daughter first came up to this building, I thought of something my mother used to tell me when I was a boy. She said a person's dignity is measured by how their children look at them when they see them again. Your daughter looks at you with pride. That's worth more than any title." Eleanor couldn't respond. She just squeezed the elderly doorman's hand and kept walking. When mother and daughter entered the executive office on the 32nd floor, they found a scene different from that of the early morning. The screens were off, the blinds open. The natural light of midday illuminated the entire space. Marcus was sitting in one of the chairs in the side lounge, not behind the desk, and next to him, standing, were two people Eleanor didn't know. "Eleanor, Lucy, please come in. I want to introduce you to two people. This is Kate. You already know her." Kate smiled from the sofa. "And this young man is Ethan Miller, the fund's lead quantitative analyst. I hired him a few months ago. I asked him to come to the office now because I want him to be present for what I'm about to say." Ethan was a well-mannered young adult, with the intelligent gaze of recent graduates from good universities, but with the healthy humility of those who understand that the professional world doesn't end with a diploma. He extended his hand to Eleanor with a respect that was no longer from one position to a service, but the respect of one professional to another. "Miss Vance, Marcus told me this morning what happened last night. I have to confess something, ma'am. I'm the analyst the system sent the first alerts to. I was at a family dinner and glanced at my phone. I saw the alert. I thought it was a false positive and silenced the notifications. I went back to dinner. By the time I was called in the early morning because Marcus had been trying to reach me, it was already too late. If you hadn't come into this office last night, ma'am, my mistake would have cost everything. I apologize, and I ask for something else. If you'll allow me, I ask for the opportunity to learn from you." Eleanor looked at him with gentle surprise. She didn't expect such humility from a young man with his profile. "Ethan, we all make mistakes. I made many in my career when I was young. The important thing isn't the mistake, it's what you do afterwards. That's exactly what Marcus told me this morning, ma'am, and that's why I'm here." Marcus gestured to Ethan to sit down. Then he looked at Eleanor and gestured to the chair in front of him. Lucy sat next to her mother. Kate observed everything from the sofa. "Eleanor," Marcus began, his voice serene, completely devoid of the breakdown of the previous night. "I thought a lot over the last few hours about how to propose what I'm about to propose to you, and I came to a conclusion that I'll share directly, without embellishment. I'm listening, Marcus. What you did last night was not a favor, not a stroke of luck, not a coincidence. What you did last night was execute, in 3 seconds, a technical competence that most of the highest-paid analysts in this country don't possess. And you did it because you cultivated it for years in silence, while life didn't allow you to show it. I'm not offering you a position, Eleanor. I'm offering you a role custom-made for you." Marcus extended his hand to Kate. The lawyer handed him a folder. Marcus opened it and turned the contents towards Eleanor. "Director of Anomaly Detection and Systemic Risk for Everest Capital Group. A new role, reporting directly to me. The entire quantitative team, including Ethan, will be under your supervision. Your mission is to build from scratch a continuous algorithmic audit protocol to ensure what happened this year never happens again in this fund. And in a second stage, that it becomes a standard we can offer to other funds in the industry. Your base salary will be competitive with any equivalent role in the international market. The folder contains the numbers. I won't read them aloud because it's not the important part of this conversation." Eleanor looked at the folder, looked at Marcus, looked at Lucy, then back at the folder. In the back of her mind, without her being able to prevent it, she saw the face of her father, Dr. Albert Vance, a university professor of applied mathematics, sitting at the kitchen table of her childhood home, helping her solve a calculus problem when she was still a little girl, telling her with that unforgettable solemnity, "Daughter, you're going to do great things with that mind. You just have to be patient for the moment the world is ready to see it." Eleanor closed her eyes for an instant. When she opened them, tears were falling unchecked. "Marcus, It's been so many years since I heard my name associated with a role like this. I almost don't know what to say. Just say yes, Eleanor. The rest we'll build together. Eleanor looked at Lucy. Her daughter met her gaze, her own eyes moist. She nodded slightly. A small but sufficient authorization. I accept, Marcus. Kate smiled. Ethan bowed his head respectfully. Marcus stood up, walked to his desk, took out an envelope he had already prepared, returned to the chair, and handed it to Eleanor. Inside is the contract, but there's also something else I want you to read. Read it when you're alone. It's something I wrote this morning while waiting for you. Eleanor received the envelope with hands that no longer trembled. At that instant, Marcus's assistant announced the journalist's arrival internally. Marcus asked her to let him in. Liam Carter entered the office with a modest step, an old notebook under his arm and a small recorder in his other hand. He was a young journalist specializing in finance and markets, known in the industry for publishing technically rigorous and humanly respectful pieces in a respected online financial publication. He greeted Marcus with a handshake. Then he greeted Kate. And when he reached Eleanor, he did something that surprised her. He extended his hand with the same reverence with which he had greeted the millionaire. Miss Vance, Marcus called me this morning, asked me to come. Before anything else, I want to tell you that I understand this is your story, not his. If at any point during this conversation you don't feel comfortable with something, tell me, and that something won't be published. I didn't come here to cause a scandal. I came to tell a technical story with human respect. Eleanor nodded. The journalist's words eased the tension that had built up in her at the thought of media coverage. Over the next 2 hours, the five Marcus, Eleanor, Kate, Ethan, and Liam reconstructed the story together for the journalist. Eleanor calmly recounted her academic and previous professional background. Marcus confirmed the incident of the early morning and the magnitude of the fraud that had been stopped in time. Kate explained the legal proceedings underway against Victor Sterling and against the group of foreign investors who had tried to capitalize on the fabricated crisis. Ethan publicly acknowledged, in front of the recorder, his initial error in silencing the system alert and the professional respect he felt for the woman who had done what he had not been capable of doing. Liam wrote, took notes, asked precise, technical, human questions. At some point he looked up from his notebook and said, I'm going to publish this in a 3-part series. The first will be tomorrow. It will focus on Miss Vance's trajectory and what she detected. The second will come out a few days later and will technically explain the mechanism of the fraud. The third, a week later, will be an analysis of the case as a governance reference for the entire industry. Marcus, do you agree that the first installment should not focus on you but on her? I more than agree, Liam. That's the only correct way. Eleanor looked at Marcus in silence and understood at that instant that the man who the night before had cried in front of his screens, believing he had lost everything, had recovered in the early morning something much more important than money. He had recovered the ability not to be the center of his own story. When Liam left the office, Lucy approached her mother, whispered in her ear, Mom, I have to leave. I have a shift this afternoon at the hospital. Are you okay? I'm fine, honey, more than fine. Tonight, we'll talk at length. I want you to tell me everything again, calmly, tonight. Tonight, yes, honey. Mother and daughter hugged in silence. Lucy left the office. Marcus accompanied her to the elevator. When he returned, he found Eleanor alone in the office lounge with the closed envelope still in her hands. Eleanor, I'm also going to step out for a bit. Stay here. Read the letter whenever you want. Use the office. It's yours from today on too. Marcus, wait, tell me. I didn't ask you this morning, but now I ask you, what was your father's name? Marcus stood in the middle of the office. The question caught him off guard. Then he smiled a small, melancholic, real smile. My father's name was Dr. Robert Thorne, Eleanor, a professor of moral philosophy at a public university. He earned little, gave much. I built this fund in part to show the world that the ideas of men like him were not naive. And for years I ended up moving away from the ideas of men like him to sustain a fund. The paradox of my life. Eleanor nodded slowly. Your father would be proud of you today, Marcus. I hope so, Eleanor. I hope so. Marcus left the office. Eleanor was left alone. She opened the envelope. Inside was the neatly arranged, professional contract, and next to the contract, a handwritten sheet in Marcus's handwriting. Eleanor unfolded it and read, Eleanor, this note is not part of the contract. It's part of the debt. My father, Robert, told me when I was young, a phrase I forgot for too many years. Success is not measured by the moment money arrives. It's measured by the person who still stands when the money leaves. Last night, I lost money for a few hours and discovered, looking at you next to the screens, that the person who was still standing in my office wasn't me, it was you, a woman whom money abandoned years ago, and who never stopped standing. This letter is to tell you that, unknowingly, you gave me my father back tonight, and for that, besides the position, I will be grateful to you for the rest of my life. Marcus. Eleanor slowly folded the letter, pressed it to her chest, and for the first time in that endless sequence of hours, allowed herself to truly cry, without holding back her face, without apologizing to anyone, without having to explain anything. She cried for her father, Albert. She cried for her husband, Daniel. She cried for the young woman she had been when the world had not yet forced her to hide. And she also cried for the woman she was becoming again, outside the Liberty Tower. Meanwhile, Liam Carter was already walking down the sidewalk with his notebook full, dialing his editor-in-chief's number to ask for space on the digital media's front page the next day. And the next day, before noon, the first installment of that series was published with a title that would circulate for weeks throughout the Spanish-speaking financial world. But that was a story that already belonged to the whole world. The following morning, before noon, the first installment by journalist Liam Carter appeared on the front page of the digital publication where he worked. The title was simple, powerful, without sensationalism: The Analyst Who Cleaned Desks. The Woman Who Detected in 3 Seconds. What an entire fund missed for months. The piece was not a scandal. It was a human and technical tribute. Liam had kept his word. The focus of the article was not Marcus Thorne. It was Eleanor Vance, her European academic background, her thesis on anomaly detection, her decision to abandon her career to care for a sick daughter. The years of silence and the early morning when the trained eye of a mature woman saved an investment fund that many analysts with brilliant positions had failed to protect. The article was shared widely. University professors sent it to their students. Mothers who had left careers cried while reading it on their phones as they served breakfast. Young analysts saved it as an ethical reference, and in investment fund offices across the continent, senior partners read it with a new discomfort, the healthy discomfort of someone who understands too late that the person cleaning their office might have a better master's degree than their own. The next 2 installments were released in the following days. The second rigorously explained the technical mechanism of the algorithmic fraud. The third proposed the Everest Capital Group case as a reference for a new generation of continuous audit protocols. Far from sinking due to the scandal, Everest Capital Group became a symbol of renewed governance in the industry. A week later, in a conference room on the 32nd floor of the Liberty Tower, Eleanor Vance presided over her first working meeting as Director of Anomaly Detection and Systemic Risk. She wore a tailored dark suit, carried a new notebook, and the small, worn photograph of Daniel Vance tucked into the inside pocket of her jacket. To her right, Ethan Miller took notes with the attention of a student who had finally found the teacher he was missing. Catherine Riley had maintained the fund's legal representation throughout the proceedings. Victor Sterling, assisted by his lawyer, complied with the cooperation agreement signed that morning. He returned, in installments that would last his lifetime, what was documented as irregularly appropriated. He accepted the corresponding civil consequences. He never again set foot in the financial world. Some months later, it is said he moved to a small town, far from the hustle, where he opened a small personal finance consultancy for working families. They say he charged fairly, and sometimes nothing at all. Eleanor, when asked about him, always said the same phrase: "Some people need to lose everything to find themselves again." At least, I can't wish that ill on anyone. The group of foreign investors who had tried to capitalize on the fabricated crisis was identified by the prosecutor's office. They never reappeared in negotiations in the country. Marcus never allowed himself public resentment towards them. He used to say that money always seeks the crack, and a fund's responsibility is to have no cracks. One afternoon, already in another season, Marcus Thorne closed his office door and rode down the elevator alone. He carried a small bouquet of flowers under his arm and a framed photograph of an older man he had taken from his drawer that very morning. The photograph showed Dr. Robert Thorne, professor of moral philosophy, smiling from a university courtyard bench. Marcus drove in silence to the cemetery where his father was buried. He walked along the paths until he found the headstone. He stood there for a long time. When he spoke, he did so in a low voice, almost as if his father were sitting beside him. "Dad, it took me a long time, but this time I came to tell you something you would have liked to hear. A woman came into my office a while ago with a cleaning cart and gave me back the phrase you used to tell me, and which I had forgotten that phrase about success not being measured by when money arrives. I used it the other day in writing, "Dad." I used it to thank her, but now I've come to return it to you. Its true owner. Thank you, Dad. Thank you for the ideas that seemed naive and ended up saving me. He placed the flowers, touched the headstone with his palm, and left. One Sunday morning, several weeks later, Eleanor and Lucy Vance had breakfast together in the kitchen of the small apartment the company had helped Eleanor buy after her hiring. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't a palace. It was a bright, modest apartment with a round wooden table where mother and daughter could sit face to face without the world rushing them. Lucy was reading the weekend news on her tablet. Suddenly she smiled. "Mom, look at this. They just announced that the Robert Thorne Foundation is going to give annual scholarships for children of service employees who want to study medicine or quantitative engineering. It's named after Marcus's father, and look at the fund's note. The first scholarship bears your name." Eleanor set her coffee cup on the table. "What?" "The first annual scholarship is called the Eleanor Vance Scholarship for daughters of women who left careers to care for their loved ones." Eleanor brought a hand to her mouth. "Marcus didn't tell me anything about this." "Mom, Marcus is returning the favor for the rest of his life, and I think he's going to keep doing it, even if you tell him to stop." The two women fell silent. Then Lucy took her mother's hand across the table. "Mom, I applied yesterday." "You applied for what, honey?" "For the scholarship, with your name on it, to finish the specialization I'm starting after my residency. I want pediatrics. I want to treat kids like I was. I want the granddaughter you don't know yet, Mom, to someday know that her doctor mom studied with a scholarship named after her grandmother." Eleanor couldn't respond. She just rose from her chair, walked to her daughter, and hugged her from behind her neck. The two women cried together in silence as the morning light streamed through the kitchen window. Mr. George Henderson retired from the Liberty Tower at the end of that season. Marcus organized a small ceremony for him in the lobby. The elderly doorman thanked them with few words, but before leaving, he approached Eleanor and handed her something wrapped in brown paper. It was an old notebook. Inside, in shaky handwriting, Mr. Henderson had for years jotted down small observations about the people who crossed his lobby. One of the pages, dated long ago, simply read, "Woman, Eleanor, carries a big book in her backpack, reads, studies. Something great lies beneath that uniform. Someday, it will be known." Eleanor clutched the notebook to her chest. "Mr. Henderson, you saw me all these years?" "Ma'am, I see everyone, but most people think the doorman doesn't see, and that's why almost no one returned my gaze as you did from the very first day." Mr. Henderson left the building, walking slowly, but before crossing the revolving door, he raised his hand for a final salute. Eleanor returned the gesture. Brenda Jenkins, the night supervisor for Citywide Cleaning Solutions, was soon promoted to General Operations Coordinator. She accepted the position on the condition of bringing other older professionals who, like Eleanor, had stories behind their uniforms, onto the night cleaning team. She said she no longer intended to look at her employees without first asking them who they truly were. One morning, already in another season, Eleanor arrived early on the 32nd floor. Before starting her day, she crossed the corridor to the office that had belonged to Victor Sterling. The door had been closed for months. Eleanor opened it with the key she had been given. The office was empty. Marcus had decided not to assign it to anyone. He wanted that room to remain a silent reminder of something he preferred not to forget. Eleanor walked to the window, looked at the city awakening below, took the small, worn photograph of Daniel from her jacket pocket, held it up to the light, then put it away again. She took a folded sheet of paper from her other pocket. It was the handwritten letter Marcus had written her that first morning. She read it sometimes when she needed to remember. She read it again, put it away, and said aloud, looking at the city, a single phrase to herself and to all those who were no longer there. "Dad, Daniel, I'm here. I'm back." She smiled and went to start her day. There are those who believe that success is measured by the moment money arrives, by the title on a business card, by the office one occupies in a tall building. The story of Eleanor Vance exists to teach us something else. Success is measured by the person who still stands when the money leaves, by the woman who cares for a daughter without asking for anything in return for years, by the analyst who keeps her books when the world closes its door on her, because she knows that someday the door will open and she will have to be ready. And those who humble others, believing that a uniform defines the human being, always forget the same thing. There are women who clean desks for years, not because they don't know finance, but because they know too much. and because life asked them for a time to silence what they knew to support those they loved. When those women finally decide to speak again, they don't need to raise their voices. They just need 3 seconds, and an entire world, without knowing why, will put down its coffee to listen.